Even when I say, look, the privacy wars are over, like that's done, um, and we lost the privacy wars, yeah, you still make it difficult. Okay. Even if you lose privacy, security is still a thing and you still want that. More so than ever.
Power on.
Real-time Sovryn is go.
Ooh, the Golden Stallion, the man of tomorrow, Savzu, the rated R radio star, here in the BDSM studio to follow up on the most recent real-time Sovryn, that being about handing over your smartphone to the authorities that request it and the concerns around digital IDs there too. If you want to listen to that, make sure the link is in the show notes for that one. If you want to, whether you're watching it on YouTube or listening to it on Spotify or Pocket Casts or however you get this content, it'll be right there for you to go listen to that first. And then to give some context to what we're talking about here, though, really, we're going to get into a subject that I have brought up and rarely do other, cybersecurity outlets or outlets that cover the tech world overall. Rarely do they ever talk about it because nobody likes to talk about it, right? It's like people being afraid of talking about, Bitcoin, because when they have a critique of Bitcoin, when they think too hard about Bitcoin, they kind of realize that, wait a minute, all money's kind of fake. And so I think for the same reason, people don't like to, in our very smartphone infrastructured world, people don't like to think about what's known as the baseband firmware, or which of course firmware that is on baseband processors. Now, I got two emails actually from one of my absolute favorite people on the planet, a man of phenomenal taste, and someone who's been listening to me, to Sovryn Tech, for over a decade, I'm sure, uh, for just pretty much, if not all, of the time that this show has been running. Um, and this came into, of course, the email address. Now, I mean, you can get in questions in the comments section on YouTube or via Spotify. They're available both platforms. Okay. Apple Podcasts might get comments at some point. Pocket Casts might as well. I don't know. Of course, those have reviews, and you're welcome to leave a review there as well. But, those are the two places where you can leave comments, or you can email me at fu@nwo.red. Now, the fu just means follow up. Really, that's all it means. But at fu@nwo.red. We might be doing a little bit of an email shakeup. Boy, last night, laying in bed with the hottest woman on the planet, that being my wife, Mrs. Ellen Sovryn, she laid out a concept, an idea to me that was just chef's kiss, right? and maybe more than kissing the chef, like like the old like the old apron that Triple H wore back in the DX days, that said "suck the cook." Anyway, excuse me, but she had this phenomenal idea. I'm not going to share it yet, but woo, I can't wait to share it all with everyone. But anyway, we're not here talking about that. We are here to get into, of course, this email and this conversation around security. And really, it does come down to security, though privacy, of course, is a kissing cousin to security, as I always say. Um, about the security around smartphones in general. So I'm going to read these emails and then we're going to break it down. We're going to cover them because it's actually this, as much as the conversation around digital IDs stored in your phone was an excellent prelude to the little cybersecurity sub-series that I'm going to be doing with Real-Time Sovryn. As much as that was a great prelude, this is in some ways, an even better prelude to that part one, which I'll actually be getting out this week. So, and it's kind of long. It was like an hour and a half that I did it. But anyway, so let's get into these emails. The subject line of the email is baseband processors and personal pocket computing. So here we go. Hi, Brian. Another great RTS. Talking about storing digital facsimiles of cattle badges, government IDs on mobile phones. Exclamation point. Yeah, it's something I wanted to say in that episode, but but for whatever reason, it didn't make the cut. But as I've often said on Sovereign Tech and any show I've ever been on, ID is for cattle, not for the human being. Digital, physical, whatever. At the end of the day, ID is for fucking cattle, and I'll stand by that. And thank you, listener, for the same. Um, so moving right along. Quote, your talk of sensitive material being kept in encrypted and hidden areas of the phone got me thinking. Am I too paranoid when I still believe our pocket computers cannot be trusted since their baseband processors have unfettered access to every nook and cranny of my phone? I'm guessing the calculation comes down to making an accurate assessment of threats and risk tolerance. But maybe there have been privacy improvements that I've been unaware of that you could speak to. Would love to hear what you think in case it's worth talking about. Thanks. And that's the end of that email. Now, they actually sent a second email, and I want to read that as well. They're kind of two separate subjects, okay? And I'll take them one by one, but I want to get it all out there. That way, you know what's coming to you here, okay? So here's the second email. This is just to follow up in the thread. Oh, and tangentially, what about using biometrics on these black slabs? Am I too paranoid by refusing to enroll in Face ID, especially if I cannot trust the baseband processor? The horrors of IBM's involvement with the Nazi regime's biometric data collection in the 1930s hit me at a very deep level years ago. I am well aware that I do not own the photons bouncing off of my face, and the powers that be are massively more powerful than me. But I feel it's a duty to make it slightly harder and slightly more costly for they, them, those to collect and weaponize the essence of my being. Parens, please forgive the gross irony of sending this message through this particular surveillance-powered email service. End parens. Only the paranoid survive. And stallion breaking in, of course, as I always say. I'm not the originator of that line, but yes, I certainly live by it. But reading on, but I'm open-minded, and maybe I'm missing out on improvements to my quality of life by being too paranoid. As always, thank you very much for everything you do. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you. Rock on. Okay, so first off, I am incredibly honored by your last line there. Um, I love what I do. Fortunately, I'm glad there are others who love what I do. I'm just putting out there what I don't think is out there. And also, part of the reason I feel so compelled to continue to podcast, into again over a decade, is because I don't feel like I hear the truth. And I listen to so many podcasts, and there's so much missed, and there's simple things many times. It's little things that they're just not thinking about. And whether it's because of, my anarchist perspective that allows me to see what they're missing, or if it's something else, maybe their profit motive is, interfering with their ability to spread, truth. I don't know. Okay, but I'm certainly honored that I have the opportunity, that I have the ability, to do this, and of course, doubly honored that anyone else finds it of value and entertaining. So that said, let's talk about this. Okay, we're going to go back to the first email, and we'll kind of take this line by line. So let's see. Your talk of sensitive material being kept in encrypted and hidden areas of the phone got me thinking. Am I too paranoid when I still believe our pocket computers, of course smartphones, cannot be trusted since their baseband processors have unfettered access to every nook and cranny of my phone? Okay, so this now, like I said, I've talked about this over the years when other people seem to be quite afraid to. But most people, like if you talked to a security researcher about this, they know the baseband processor, or particularly the baseband firmware, is generates pause for concern. Okay, because the processor itself is not open source hardware, and the firmware, sure as fuck, is an open source software, or open source firmware in this case. Okay. Now, an important thing to keep in mind, and I want to disabuse anyone of thinking that I am engaging in, whataboutism, which means that when somebody raises a concern and you respond with, "Well, what about this?" That's not what I'm doing here. Okay, like this isn't whataboutism, and I like to think I never do that, but I just want to be clear that I don't want that levied against me in this. Okay, the point I'm going to bring up is that, and this is going to color further into the conversation, is that the issue with the baseband processor is more or less just as true as the Wi-Fi processor. Okay, in every device, smartphone, laptop, whatever. Okay. The difference between the two is that the Wi-Fi standard does have some security built in. So you need to understand, or people, the listener here obviously understands baseband processors, but if you've never heard of this before, the baseband processor is basically it is the processor that controls the cellular, not Wi-Fi, not Bluetooth. Okay. It's what controls the cellular connectivity. All right. The cellular radios. It's what controls that on a modern smartphone. And not just modern smartphones. Baseband processors have been around since the 90s. And like many things that were designed in the 90s for purposes of interconnectivity of devices, security was not at the forefront because I don't think even then people, I mean, yes, you could say, oh, what about the mother of all demos? They knew we were all going to be interconnected and all that stuff. No, very few people actually thought that. You think of guys that like started, that were, major founders of the internet, like Tim Berners-Lee, or Vint Cerf. You ask them today, and they openly state in interviews, yeah, we wish we baked encryption and security into, TCP/IP, into the protocols, but they didn't, because again, people weren't thinking about this shit, and I don't want to, like, by no means do I want to call them short-sighted or stupid, because we forget now, now all of us, I mean, like the listener here, to call smartphones pocket computers is accurate. It really is. They are computers in the in the strictest sense. Okay, I've often bristled at when people call them supercomputers. Yeah, they're supercomputers by 90s standards, but they're not supercomputers today. And really, they're only supercomputers relatively. Comparatively, they're not supercomputers like by design. Okay, like an actual supercomputer that consumers might have owned that was somewhat popular was the PS3, and I mean the PlayStation 3, right? Because that had the cell processor in it. Okay, that's a supercomputer. Believe it or not. You think it's just a console? No, that's actually a supercomputer. Okay, smart. Supercomputers are something by design. All right, so I don't like that term getting bantied about smartphones because they're not supercomputers by design. They're super, as in they're incredibly more powerful than machines that we had decades ago, but that's very different. Anyway, don't want to get lost on that, but a little history lesson is necessary. So the baseband processor is what controls cellular activity. Okay, and cellular activity is at the very heart. Activity and connectivity is at the very heart of what your smartphone is for, right? And what cell phones are for, and what they've been for since the 90s, even though they existed even before then. But the baseband firmware was generally, this was part of like the GSM spec, so it's always been there. But again, security concerns weren't at the forefront at the time. This fits in well. In fact, when we get into the cybersecurity part one, I talk about, Turing completeness and, operating systems not being designed for connectivity. I mean, you can think back to, Windows 95, right? When the internet started to become a thing, Microsoft basically wasn't ready for it. And so they just put in internet connectivity, into Windows 95, but they didn't think about security at all at the time. And it was a clusterfuck. You can even ask them; they know it was a clusterfuck. People didn't like really herald like internet security and Windows in one sentence until like Windows XP Service Pack 2 when they finally put a firewall into the OS. Before you had to like buy one separately from a third party. It wasn't in the OS. And like you think about that now, it's like, wait a minute, an operating system didn't have a fucking firewall in it? What the hell? Right. Again, people didn't think about these things. And this is just as true for the baseband processor and the firmware that runs it. Okay. People were not thinking about security at this level. So, and when these things were originally designed, and now it's all kind of patchwork, right? At this stage. Okay. So there's a little history on the baseband processor. What can be done is because the baseband processor is designed to receive any input, and you want this ultimately because you want it to be able to connect to, when you travel, say 50 miles, there's a good bet, or say 100 miles, there's a good bet that your cell phone, your smartphone is going to bounce off of 2 or 3 cell towers, right? Meaning that, it's going to connect to different cell towers over a distance so that you have constant connectivity and your call doesn't drop, or you get that text message, or whatever. Or you can keep watching that video, whatever it ends like this one, maybe, or whatever it happens to be. Okay, so you want that, like that. It kind of needs to do that, unless you're going to literally change, like the wireless standard that is cellular connectivity, which of course has happened many times. 5G, 4G, LTE, 4G. Oh, now I can't remember what they used to call that, WAN, whatever it was, um, or 4G Max. Maybe that was WiMAX. Is that what it was called? Yeah, okay. Um, and then in 3G and so on. But you'd have to change like so much about how these devices connect to each other. And I'm not saying it's not possible to do it in a more secure way, but you would really have to change things up uh, away from the infrastructure that is so widespread right now. I mean, it would be so costly to create an entire new system, okay, that doesn't require a baseband processor. So that's not going to happen anytime soon. It's just not. So we're stuck with baseband processors. And I mean, could it change? Sure, but there's other solutions perhaps, and we're going to talk about solutions around this because over the past few years, there really has been. I mean, that was the question. Like, um, has there been some change that I don't know about? Yeah, I think there have been some changes that maybe people aren't necessarily aware of. Does it really mitigate the problem? That's up to some debate, and we'll talk about it. Okay, so anyway, so that's the baseband processor. Functions very similarly to a Wi-Fi Wi-Fi chip, Wi-Fi, we wouldn't exactly call it a processor, but you could, but, functions very, very similarly. Okay. But all of these things are closed standards. Ethernet is actually the one that is somewhat open, depending upon the spec that we're talking about. Because this is the concern is that because your baseband firmware is like designed to, you know, take in and push out anything, it could effectively connect to, like, say, a Stingray. Um, which Stingray is a false cell tower or well cellular transmission. Okay, but it's kind of set up like a tower. It might not be a tower, it might be on a plane or something, but it's designed to mimic a cell tower. Okay, but then be able to spy on everything you're doing or feed you, malware of some type. Okay, engage in some kind of exploit. So that's kind of the concern with baseband firmware. I mean, and we could tell so many other stories, but if you really want to research more, like I do recommend that you get more into the technicals of it if you want to. But let's talk about what has been done to try and mitigate this very real security concern. And basically, I can't speak to if it was necessarily done anytime before. Okay, but a way that you keep so I want to read. Let me read from the email here. Am I too paranoid when I still believe our pocket computers cannot be trusted since their baseband processors have unfettered access to every nook and cranny of my phone? Yeah, so depending upon the phone, and I can only speak to two specific ones, okay, or two specific brands. Um, but depending upon what brand of phone you have, and I don't mean Android and iOS, okay, like I don't just mean that difference. Um, they don't have unfettered access anymore. Um, it's still a problem. It's still, something, yes, you absolutely have to pay attention to. Okay. But um, there have been some mitigations, put into play here. Okay. So the two brands that I'm going to speak to specifically are iPhone and Google's Pixel phones. Since the Pixel 2, which when did that come out? Around 2017, 2018. They have implemented, and also Apple has implemented this as well into iPhones, okay, and into the iOS spec overall. Well, you would call an IOMMU, okay? This is an input-output memory management unit. What this basically is a like a gate. Imagine a gate with like bars on it, right? Okay. This gate stands between your operating system and to some degree parts of the hardware, right? I mean, a secure enclave is a common like iPhones have what's called the secure enclave, which stores a lot of identity, ID hashes, all kinds of things within it. Okay, that's a mixture of hardware and software working together, right? Okay, I mean you can argue with the computer everything's a mixture of hardware and software working, but I mean like there's specific hardware things built into it. Same with like the Pixel phone, where you have the what is it like depending upon what model you have, but ever since the Tensor processors, or that Google has put out there, you have the Titan chip, right? The Titan 1 or the Titan 2 or Titan 3, whatever they're up to now with the Pixel 9, that is also like a specific piece of hardware designed to secure a lot of this more, information you want to be more careful with. Okay, so the an IOMMU, all right, would effectively, like prevents certain types of traffic and requests from getting to these secure enclaves and from getting to certain aspects of the operating system of the smartphone. Okay, Apple started implementing it around the same time that Google did, partly because Google called them out. Project Zero, the security team for Google, Project Zero kind of called them out, saying like, and they made the point. They're like, well, yeah, sure. There's this what they I think it was called Dart. I don't know if Apple still calls it Dart now, but that was one of the original IOMMUs that they implemented in iPhone. And they said it's like, well, look, it's all closed source. We don't know. We can't truly test if this is mitigating any concerns around like remote code execution through the baseband firmware. And but it's there, okay? Like it does exist. Um, and certainly, and like I said, ever since the Pixel 2, it's also been a part of the Pixel tech stack overall. Um, so but again, all of these things, just like the Wi-Fi spec, I want to bring that up again. All of these things are closed source. Okay, we don't like the IOMMUs, like we don't really know. I mean, to some degree with AOSP with Android, we might have a little bit of a better idea. Okay, but it's no guarantee that every brand implements these things. They could implement them differently in every one. There's, I mean, again, it's a little bit broader with Android, but also, again, this isn't just a software play, right? Like there's a reason that Google, implemented the Titan chip into Pixel phones. Okay. So the point I'm getting at is, as far as this goes, is there has been improvements. Is it perfect? No, but there have been improvements. Okay. Um, and we could get into a deeper conversation around, how do our pocket computers compare to our laptops and desktop computers? And I think that could certainly get interesting. Um, yeah, let's go ahead and talk about that, because that's kind of one of the points that I want to bring up here. Okay. Um, I have, I think I have the reputation of being, kind of anti-smartphone. And it's not an unfair reputation for me to have built up. Um, But what's ultimately happened, okay, in over the past decade, is the advantages, say of a desktop computer, okay, or of a laptop computer, have really they've basically reached feature parity with smartphones. Okay, in fact, we can see this with a lot of like what Microsoft's announcing, where they're basically trying to put in any feature that is like in as it pertains to generative AI that Apple or Google is baking into their devices. They're trying to put that right into Windows, right into Copilot Plus PCs. Right now, Copilot Plus PCs themselves, or at least the original ones, were all based on Qualcomm processors, all based on mobile processors. Okay, so my point in bringing this up is the sad fact that seems to be happening is our desktop class machines, that includes laptops, but our desktop class machines are themselves basically becoming smartphones in hardware and software functionality. I mean, even on the Apple side, right? Like M1, M2, M3, M4, those are all just plays on, the A series of chips, whether they're basing it on the A16, the A17, the A18, whatever. Well, like that's all it is. They're literally smartphones. Okay, they're SoCs. They don't have, say for like MacBooks and everything. They don't have, um, they don't have cellular connectivity. Okay, so they don't need that baseband firmware, but they're ultimately smartphones. Okay. And so this is kind of the point of reckoning. And I do want to talk about the Wi Fi thing. It's kind of the point of reckoning that I've come to is really going forward, minus Linux, though even Linux, like the kernel is being adjusted to work on Qualcomm chips, right? But minus Linux, Mac and Windows, which is the bulk of the world's, personal computers. Okay, otherwise the world really does run on Linux, and thank Satan for that. But um, the bulk of computers that people use to actually get shit done, okay, to actually do things that might unfortunately require a lot of proprietary software that may not run on Linux unless you're using virtualization, which in that case, like, you know, okay, it's a bit more secure, sure, but it's still not really solving the problem of trying to get everything onto Linux. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in that part one of the cybersecurity subseries. But anyway, I'll save that conversation for that. But bottom line is computers. Everybody's following Apple's lead here. Apple turned the MacBook basically into a glorified smartphone. And that's exactly what Microsoft wants now too. And there are massive parts of the Linux world that want the same thing. And for good reason, because because there's so much money in the smartphone space as compared to the PC space, because there's so much money there, like the amount of development for security capabilities and so much more that gets put into the smartphone space has created really like this very hardy and to some degree hardened platform. Okay. And as to where like so much money is spent in cybersecurity more on smartphones than it is on desktop class computers. Servers notwithstanding, of course, servers are a whole other beast, whole other animal. But then that's not usually something under the purview of the everyday individual. That's something being handled by the tech giants in some form or fashion. Whether it's Amazon, Google, Oracle, Microsoft, whoever. Okay. Um, so okay, so I just want to rehash quick. Um, Baseband processors really no longer have that unfettered access. Okay, we don't know to what degree exactly that they're more protected, but we do know that they are more protected. Now, I want to touch on this. Okay, um, not and by no means am I an Apple fanboy. All right, but one of the things that I really appreciate, because I haven't even brought up supply chain attacks. That's a whole other form of exploit that uh, very few companies are really doing anything about, and is very concerning and could bring down the entire digitally interconnected world with relative ease. And there aren't many mitigations you can do about supply chain attacks. Okay, but Apple is the one company that seems to be doing something about this. And like what we're expecting in 2025 in what we've known they've been doing, and they've spent billions and billions of dollars on this, is they've been trying to create their own 5G modem. Now, why have they been spending so much money on creating their own 5G modem? Isn't the 5G modem, from Qualcomm or whoever, isn't that enough? Isn't that good enough? It seems to work for everybody else. It seems to, meet the spec and everything. I think what it comes down to is it actually comes down to issues like security concerns around the baseband firmware. They want to control the full stack. And what we actually learned this year as well is Apple is looking at developing their own Wi-Fi chips as well, their own Wi-Fi cards. Not that they're cards, right? It's all SoC. And for those that don't know, SoC just means system on chip. It just means that like everything is built into like one board, one chip. Like there's no video card you're switching out. There's none of this other jazz. Everything's just on one die. Um, so so Apple is clearly concerned about the supply chain issue. They're aware of that, but also they're aware of the issues around. Now, granted, Apple's still closed source, and to some degree, you need to trust them. Um, but they recognize that there are security concerns around the cellular modem, right? Baseband. And they recognize there are the same exact concerns around the Wi-Fi card, or around the Wi-Fi chip. And so them wanting to, again, have this completely in-house, control the supply chain, be able to completely have the software and hardware, married together so tightly, like, there's no way, like, that couple ain't separating, baby, ever. And good time. I applaud them for that, for wanting to have that extreme level of control. And to some degree, I actually I believe, because of who their clientele is, right? Think of look into. I'm not going to get into it here. Look into kind of like, what are the cultural concepts around, the iPhone, okay, and MacBooks and whatever. The ideas like that. Oh, it's been used by all the people in Hollywood. It's used by the wealthy. It's used by these elites. It's used blah 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 blah, blah whatever. Okay, that speaks to, those are the people that are constantly buying, new iPhones, new Apple devices and everything, and ultimately, those are the people you need to please, and those people never want the fappening, remember that, they never want the fappening to ever happen again. Okay, so Apple, making things like advanced data protection, along with other security and privacy features, do they take that seriously? Oh yeah, I think they do. um, and they've been, I also feel like Apple has been very much emboldened by the fact that they were able to get away with not doing CSAM scanning, and that there was clearly a massive pushback, from from their users, right? And even I'm going to take a moment, even think about that. Okay, let's do this. Because if you're the kind of, because you might be saying, it's like, oh no 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 no, they just told us that they're not, scanning for CSAM or whatever. Even though, I mean, they still, like, I think there's some degree in which they were going to implement that, perhaps, where they were going to look out for hashes in iMessage or something like that if you turn a certain feature on, whatever. Anyway, before you go, thinking that, oh, they were lying about it, that they weren't going to implement it, they just did it secretly. Look, do, do you my guess is, a lot of the people, not all, but a lot of the people who, and look, be paranoid, okay, question them, don't trust them. I'm 100% with you on that. I don't trust them either. Okay, the only reason that I trust in any degree of security with any computer, whether pocket, personal, server, whatever, is, it really comes out of a certain, like, what do they call it? MAD, right? Mutually assured destruction. That, like, if you go breaking one of these things, A, you're going to reveal to the whole world that you can do that. B, you're going to break so much because everything's so interconnected. Like, you just kind of can't. Okay. Anyway, so if you're that kind of, I think a lot of people who would not necessarily take Apple at its word on this. Again, I'm not knocking people for that, but I don't think it's unfair to say that you might also be the kind of person who, maybe thinks that, like, Hollywood's full of pedophiles, and that they do things to children, and or spirit food, or some of this other jazz. Okay. And, if you think that they're doing that, well, it's a pretty good bet that they're probably recording some of what they're doing on iPhones, right? Because these people aren't fucking intelligent. Like, if you think these Hollywood people are a bunch of pedophiles or whatever, the same Hollywood people, do they even know what TCP/IP means? Like, do they have any real, genuine understanding of a tech stack at all? No. Okay. They, believe me, and you can read from, like, customer service agents for, like, the telcos, and ISPs and everything. Sometimes they have assistants calling them from some of these, like, Hollywood types, but often enough, these people they've gotten calls, from all kinds of major Hollywood stars, from the stars themselves, saying, "Hey, can you help me set up my phone and some shit?" I mean, like, believe me, this happens. I know. So anyway, that CSAM would be scanning their phones as well, right? And they don't want that. So the point I'm getting at is Apple's, the way their primary customer base um, wants these privacy features. Okay, and that ironically, ends up being, very much ends up being a boon for all of us in that sense. Okay, now you can disagree with me on that argument, and if so, okay, you disagree, and we're both kind of at a loss for evidence here, just like we're completely running off of closed sourced hardware and software slash firmware when it comes to baseband processors, Wi-Fi, and so on. Okay, so we're all running with, you know, lacks a very large lack of evidence across the board. Okay, so my point in this is that we've gotten to the point that really the modern computer is just as egregious. If the smartphone is an egregious device for varying reasons and a concerning device for varying reasons, the modern computer, in many ways, has become the same thing. And it almost pains me to say this, but we're also getting to the point where actually, in some ways, okay, now remember, privacy is a separate conversation than security. It shouldn't be, but it is. In some ways, the modern smartphone is a more secure device than your laptop. Unless, let's be clear here, unless we're talking about, buying old ThinkPads, putting Cubes OS on it, and, really going a distance with that, like buying a privacy beast, as they're called, or, some other things, or from, there's companies out there that are trying to make like more open source hardware, like Librem, and some others that are really trying to do, good things with making desktop class computing, a much more secure and private affair, and one that you have a lot more control over. Okay, so I recognize that. Okay, I recognize that if you're running Tails, you're playing on a different, ball. You're playing a whole different sport, and good for you. Like you're doing it right. Okay, but if you're just trying to watch a YouTube video or go on Instagram or um, I don't know, look around. Well, there's a bunch of discs next to me. Or you're trying to burn Blu-rays, right? You're trying to rip Blu-rays or something that you already paid money for. You know, you're not doing that on those types of operating systems. Okay, unless you're virtualizing within Windows, but then you're still running Windows, and then I mean, it all virtualization as an excuse, as like a no true Scotsman argument, okay, of some kind, like, or well, wait, how does that go? Okay, well, let's just say saying virtualization. Well, I don't use Windows, and I still rip Blu-rays and everything, and make exact copies of them. And I'm not using Make MKV, but that's because I'm running Windows 11 in a virtual, in a VM. Shut up! You're still running Windows. God damn it! I mean, I get that all the time, and I'm just like, you're still admitting that you need Windows. Well, Brian, why don't you go out there and develop like a Blu-ray software that'll work on Linux, besides Make MKV, which again doesn't really exactly let you play Blu-rays. It just lets you rip them into MKVs. Okay, that's not what I'm talking about here. If you're so concerned about it, blah blah blah, and oh man, like that's my job to solve. Okay, um, but also, it's not a matter of that. And this is another episode I actually want to get into at some point, but we got a second email to get into. I'm going to get into that. This is another episode that I want to do, because everybody's talking about that California law that just passed, that is supposed to tell companies you can no longer use the language if you're buying from a digital, like an e-shop of some kind. Okay, a digital store, whether it's videos, games, whatever, you're buying it digitally, but again, it's digital. You don't actually own it, because really you're just paying for the license. Well, I want to do an episode about that, because so many people are saying this is why I buy physical, this is why I do this, and that's a horseshit argument. Okay, because even if you have physical, like even Blu-rays, which I have thousands of Blu-rays, even if you have physical, you still have to pay for a device that has to be able to run the license to access or to get past the DRM that the Blu-ray has. Okay. I'll do a whole episode on this and break this down, but people's arguments around this are fucking nonsense. Okay. They don't understand the issue whatsoever. And I don't care about a law telling people that, trying to somehow make people feel like they're making a more informed decision. The people aren't informed at all. They have no concept of how all of this actually works. And anyway, I guess that's why I'm here. Okay. Let's get to the next part of the email. So, okay, very simply, yes, there have been some in privacy or security, I should say, improvements. Privacy that's where it really comes to tolerance, but there have been security improvements around the baseband firmware. Okay, in at least Pixel phones and iPhones, at least in those. I'm not saying that they're great improvements, but there have been improvements, and we can't really know because again, it's all closed source, so we can only kind of guess based upon throughput testing. Okay. Second email. Oh, and here's, I'm going to reread it. Oh, and tangentially, what about using biometrics on these black slabs? Am I too paranoid by refusing to enroll in Face ID, especially if I cannot trust the baseband processor? Um, so, okay, let me address that quick. We'll do this one a little more line by line. Let me address that. Are you too paranoid for enrolling in Face ID, especially if I cannot trust the baseband processor? Well, like I was talking about, the IOMMU, part of what that is protecting is the secure enclave, which is where the hash, which allows Face ID, that whole security system to work, is located. Okay, so I don't think you're. Basically, I guess my short answer to it is you're not being too paranoid. Or okay, you're being too paranoid and concerned about the baseband processor at this point, though maybe not. You can really never be too paranoid. I don't want to. There is no level of like being too paranoid. Okay, but this is the attempt to solve this in the modern smartphone has been attempted and seems to be working. Okay. My concern, and why I still say refuse to enroll in Face ID, the reason I recommend that is because, and granted, again, this is my paranoia coming through. For sure, it'd be hard for somebody to actually hold me down. But if somebody wanted to access my smartphone, all they have to do is hold me down or just hold me, grab my smartphone and point it in my face, and boom, they're in. They're in everything and they can do everything. They're just holding me there and and they just got to hold my head and then hold my smartphone up to my face and they can do whatever they want. That is the dumbest. I've heard security researchers and IT people say that passcodes are the worst security system ever developed and that everybody should be using biometrics and Face ID. And I'm like, you have it so backwards. Like you are wrong on so many levels. Because everything I just said about Face ID can just as easily be done with, your fingerprints. Okay, like with Touch ID if we're talking about iOS. So biometrics are inherently not secure because they're too easy to get past. A passcode, yes, there's ways that you could like see a person enter their passcode and whatever else. Well, you need to be careful about that and change your passcode regularly. But a passcode can be so much more secure, and always make them at least 6 digits. Okay, for entropy's sake. But well, not for entropy, but for brute forcing's sake. Um, but yeah, that's why I don't recommend biometrics because I just think you're too easy a target at that point, and your digital life is so interconnected with your physical life. Like you want to have some degree of separation between those two to protect for one to protect the other. And what I mean by that is you don't want your thumbprint to be able to unlock your phone, okay? Because then somebody's going to attack you physically to get access to your phone to be able to do that, right? And that kind of goes both ways. So, okay, because you also don't want to make it easy to get access to all your digital shit, like I said. All right. So there's that. Let's get to the next part here. The horrors of IBM's involvement. So anyway, all right, sorry, real quick. Your paranoia is well founded. All right. I mean, it might not, maybe the baseband processor got solved, maybe. But there's still plenty of other issues with using biometrics where I say don't use them if you can help it. Um, or, like I said, I think in the previous episode of Real Time Sovereign, where I mentioned that you can use biometrics in the phone, but don't use it to unlock your phone. You can use it for apps within the phone to make that a smoother, more convenient, faster process. But, because Pixel phones will allow for this, where you can set it to don't unlock the phone with biometrics, but you can unlock apps with biometrics. So, like that's a little more palatable. Okay, let's keep reading the email. The horrors of IBM's involvement with the Nazi regime's biometric data collection in the 1930s hit me at a very deep level years ago. Yeah, I want to touch on this for 1 second. So, this gets into Deamag, and a lot of this was covered in a tremendous book. It's been around for, almost 30 years now, by Edwin Black, that being IBM and the Holocaust. Now, he released an expanded edition of the book a few years ago. And just in the past couple months, in 2024, it was released in audiobook form. It never had been before. And it's the expanded edition, and it's on Audible. I highly recommend. It's not a long read. I highly recommend you do read it. In audiobook form makes it all the more convenient to do so. Anyway, I am well aware that I do not own the photons bouncing off my face, of course, as I often say. Thank you for listening. And that the powers that be are massively more powerful than me. But I feel it's a duty to make it slightly harder and slightly more costly for they, them, those to collect and weaponize the essence of my being. Yeah, totally. Even when I say, look, the privacy wars are over, like that's done, and we lost the privacy wars, yeah, you still make it difficult. Okay. Even if you lose privacy, security is still a thing and you still want that. More so than ever, because especially since like a lot of financial data, health data, and so much more is stored digitally. Protect the fuck out of that from everybody. And as I always say, the more secure we all are, the more secure we all are. So, um, okay, so keep reading. Only the paranoid survive, but I'm open minded and maybe I'm missing out on improvements to my quality of life by being too paranoid. Yeah, I don't think there's that great of improvements. Okay, like really, um, that somehow like you're missing out on, and because all that's really being missed out on are really just conveniences. Okay, um, a point I'm going to get to in this cybersecurity series coming up, sub series coming up, is that you really want to have a easily replicable device, that digital device, smartphone or desktop. We'll talk about that. Okay, which one I recommend. Even though, again, one mountain, many paths. That's security is that. So many things in life are that way. All of life seems to be that way, and security is no different. When I bring this up, I'm actually like to some degree, it is about making your life a little easier, but also it can be kind of difficult to, like rely on one device to handle like all of your security, because you have to, part of what we've gone through in the past 25, 30 years is, we're just used to just making accounts everywhere. Yeah, I have 4 email addresses, in different services, and I have all this stuff spread all over the place. And while that seemed like at one point might even seem like a strategic, a threat model, like a way to solve a threat model, like that it could have been a strategy to not have all your eggs in one basket. And it's still a good idea to not have all your eggs in one basket. We went way overboard. Okay, with that. Like, no, we shouldn't be using 20 different messaging services at the same time. If you want to play digital hopscotch, okay, that's one thing. But like to have that many vectors into your personal life, oh no, it's a horrible idea. Okay. So I'm going to expand on this more in future episodes that are already recorded. So don't worry about that. Uh, because it's a conversation that needs to be had. But basically, the long and short of all of this is, and I've been talking for like 50 minutes now, but the long and short of all of this is the desktop computer, minus if you're going with some crazy ass Linux machine. And I say that with respect. I say that with, applause and like, yes, use it. Okay. Minus that, But then there's a lot of fun things you may not be able to do on that Linux machine, or it might not match certain parts of your workflow or whatever else. Okay. Minus that, smartphone the line between smartphones and desktop computers is very much falling away. Okay, and not to say that smartphones are becoming as powerful as desktop computers. That's not necessarily true. Maybe in the Apple world that might be becoming a thing, even though the software isn't there to match it, right? Like, how overpowered does an iPad seem compared to the software that can run? It's fucking ridiculous. Of course, we know why, that it doesn't run Mac OS, but regardless, it's still like overpowered. Okay. Um, so yeah, desktop class computers are wildly more powerful. Leaps, throw a NVIDIA 4080 into something. I mean, like, you're blowing away every multitudes of smartphones on the planet put together. Like, I mean, you're just slaughtering them. So, so I'm not saying that somehow the power of a smartphone is somehow matching the power of a desktop class computer. That's not what I'm getting at. What I'm saying is, functionally, they are reaching feature parity. They are reaching this, where they operate pretty much in the same way and with the same philosophy, which is a really important thing to bring up. They operate with the same philosophy. And this is by design. And this is it's not even a matter of what the manufacturers want. It doesn't matter what HP wants. It doesn't matter what Lenovo wants. Okay. When Microsoft says, we're putting in AI features, we're putting in features that make this more of a mobile device. We want to be able to, like wake on lift of the lid of the laptop or something. When we want all of this stuff to work, we're making our operating system do that. And if you don't put that in, well, then you fall behind, in PC sales, buddy, because they're going to buy the computers that do, because we've enabled it. All right. So you have company, like there are companies steering this ship in this way, where they want these things to function like where desktop class computers, they want them to function like smartphones. And they're starting to. And that comes with sometimes advantages, but many times, also disadvantages. Because at the same time, they're not smartphones. And this gets into a conversation of Turing completeness. And that's really going to lead into the next episode that I plan on putting out on, basically on the subject, which would be part 1 of the cybersecurity subseries that I'm going to do. Because the relationship with these machines, like your philosophical relationship with these machines, has dramatically changed. Dramatically changed. And it was such a, it's the frog boil, right? It's the boiling frog. Like, it's been such a slow creep that we didn't really notice it. And I think the whole quote unquote generative AI revolution, I'm very particular, got to be so freaking particular about that. Generative AI, not Skynet. Oh. Has really brought it to bear, that these things, like, that these devices are basically becoming the same thing. They're all becoming, part of the same platform. And if anything, they're all becoming like ecosystems, that one doesn't work right without the other, in a very real sense. And just look at new features in the Phone Link app for Windows, and you can see that. Um, so anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. And I love these emails, and such a brilliant guy, like such great points to bring up. And no, you can never be too paranoid. Okay. And I don't necessarily think you're missing out on much, but as we go through this series, maybe you'll think about it. You'll have other questions. And if anyone else has questions on any of this, or you think I'm dead wrong, again, get it in the comments on Spotify, on YouTube, wherever you're listening to this, or you can email me, fu@nwo.red, just like this listener did, and give me your thoughts on the matter. If you think I'm dead wrong, prove me wrong, and I'll talk about it. I'll be the first one to come out and say, I am so glad I was wrong. I mean, believe me, I'm always happy to do that. I love getting proven wrong, because my mind goes to fucking crazy dark places, because I'm as paranoid as them all. So anyway, I will leave this episode at that and look forward to our little cybersecurity sub-series. I'm very excited to start sharing that with you, and I will see all of you on the other side.